Yo, what it do, YouTube? I am back at it again with another video. And today we will be talking about the Falklands. Yes, we are going to be talking about the Falklands. Well, what is this? Falklands. Well, it's an island, but it has a very fascinating history. So I was like, why not do a video on this? And by the way, this is my second video for today. And I hope you guys enjoyed the story of Falklands. Well, not story, this is reality. The British arrived in the Falklands. And they weren't the first ones to discover it because there were already French people in there. But there was two main parts of the islands. So the French were in one side and the British were on the other. And the French didn't make it clear that it was their territory. So British claimed it theirs now. So the British and French were unaware of each other. So one day, probably wandering around in the island, they met. I don't know how, but they saw each other. And they were like, "What are you doing here? This is our territory." So this is what happened. But then Spain came along and they were like, the Pope drew a line that all of this stuff belongs to Portugal and all of this stuff belongs to Spain. So they were basically asking the French to move out because it's Spanish territory. France and Spain were really good friends. So, and Spain was willing to give money. So the French were like, "Come on, Spain, we'll give you this territory, but give us that money." And then the Spanish kicked the British out of the Falklands, but then the British were threatening the Spanish to go to war. And then the Spanish went to the French and were like, "Hey France, do you want to fight this war?" The French were like, "No, buddy, we are not prepared for this war." So, since France said no, the Spanish had to give the British their territory back. But then, a couple years later, the American Revolution came, and the British had to leave their territory. And remember how France and the Spanish were friends? Well, Napoleon Bonaparte ruined that all, and then Spanish had to leave too. So the Falklands were unoccupied for 10 years. Psych, it was for a couple decades. Then Argentina came into this, and they asked permission from the British to set up camp in not even camp. This guy, he needed to make money there. So he asked permission from Buenos Aires and the British government to live there. Then the United States started hunting whales around the Falklands. And that guy did not like that. So he was like, "Hey, Argentina, help me." Argentina was like, "Hey, do it yourself, buddy." And they gave him some weapons and made him governor. That made the British mad. And they were like, that means that we're not responsible of that territory anymore. That means they're occupying it. And then the British had to come down to the Falklands again. And since the British had way more guns, they kicked the Argentines out of there. And for the next century, the Falklands were in British control. But then, in 1981, Argentina was like, they barely have any people in the Falklands, so maybe let's send like a couple hundred people there, take over, and the British probably won't do anything. The Argentines were able to kick the British out of the Falklands, but they were wrong to assume that the British would do absolutely nothing about it. So there was a war. And long story short, the British won.